Oh, awesome. Nice.
You don't need to see your like.
Okay, so it's recording right now?
Yes.
Okay. Wait, you just took my paper.
Oh.
I'm nervous enough already without you taking my material. I mean,
She tried the same thing on me the other day, and I stopped her right
I'm,
Oh, that's just
that's just decoration right there. Just disregard. So, as you can see, today I'm going to be talking about observation of Einstein-Podolsky Rosen entanglement of superquantum structures by induction through nonlinear transuranic crystal of extremely long wavelength pulse from Woodlock source array. And the first and most important thing to remember is that it's a load of crap and it's just a bunch of big words I used to get your attention. And it worked. Hopefully, right? Yeah. My actual topic today is time travel, and what I'm going to be talking about today are some of the more common terms used in discussions of time travel, and then the two major theories concerning timelines and how they operate. So the first theme, or term I'm going to discuss is space. And it's important that you understand the definition of space as anything that we can see. We, as human beings, exist in 3 dimensions, which I'll also go into more detail just to give you an overly simple explanation of it. Space is anything that's 3-dimensional that we can touch. You know, this is 3-dimensional, the wall, the room, us. Its counterpart, time, is a little more abstract, hard to grasp. Time, as we know it, is constantly moving, and we can't really travel through it, so far as we know. An entity is just something that I'm going to define as anything that is. You know, this pen is an entity. I'm going to be using that when I talk about dimensions, which are my next definitional thing. There's 6 dimensions that relate to time travel, and I'm going to talk about the first 3 and then the second 3 as a set. So the first dimension that everybody knows is just a single entity, a single point, a dot, like I drew up there. Just so you know, this was done in paint, so it's not too sophisticated, but it'll get the message across. A one-dimensional point just exists. It's so infinitely tiny we don't really know how to define it. But when you move into the second dimension, that's where you get the analogy of something being as flat as a piece of paper. If you've got a little stick figure drawn on a piece of paper, he's in 2 dimensions. He's flat. But the important thing here is you can have a line in the second dimension, and that connects 2 different points. And the third dimension, to use an extremely rough analogy, is how you move in the second dimension. If you wanted to get from, for example, in the second dimension, this point to that point, the only way you can do it in the second dimension is to go straight there. In the third dimension, however, you have the ability to, go up and over and move where you are in not just that flat area, but also something with some depth. Now, the fourth dimension is a single point, again, and it's a point in time. And as I've drawn up here is just, happy stick figure guy. And he's just standing there. That would be like if you took a picture of what's going on right now. That would be a 4-dimensional point. The 5th dimension is where you gain some, the ability to move around. We travel through the 5th dimension when we, exist. When I go from point A to point B, I'm moving along a line that exists in the 5th dimension. The 6th dimension is how you travel around in time. That's a really rough analogy. It's not scientifically accurate at all. And if our resident math major were here, I'm sure she'd be contradicting me left and right. But it kind of serves the purpose that I wanted to introduce. There's one last term I want to tell you about before I move into my second topic, timelines, and that's a paradox. And a paradox is something that contradicts itself. The most common paradox that you encounter when you're talking about time travel is something called the grandfather paradox. The theory says if I go back in time and I kill my grandfather, then my grandfather never had one of my parents, and my parents never had me, so I never existed, and I never went back in time and killed my grandfather. So who did that? It's an endless cycle, and it's not really something that you can figure out just, you know, without bringing in a ton of math. But it's important when talking about these timelines. Now, the first kind of timeline there is something called an immutable timeline. There's a really easy example to talk about what this is. If you haven't read the Harry Potter books, or you don't want to, you may want to cover your ears, but in the third Harry Potter book, Harry is attacked at a certain point. Oh, right, fine. Okay, that needs to be clear. Anyway, in the third Harry Potter book, Harry is attacked at one point in time, and as he's laying on the ground being attacked, he sees some figure across a lake cast a spell that saves him. And in this haze that he's kind of in, he believes that it's his father, who he knows is dead, but he really wants to talk to. Later in the book, he goes back in time, and as he and his companion are waiting for something to happen, he says, oh, we've got time, and so he goes over to where he saw that figure on the other side of the lake, and he thinks it's his father, so he's sitting there watching himself be attacked across this lake, and eventually he realizes, that was never my father, that was myself, and so he stands up and casts this spell that saves his own life. That's an immutable timeline, because nothing can actually be changed. Everything is a fixed constant. It's always happened, it always will happen. And this is where nothing can be changed. You can't go back in time and kill Hitler. The world exists, so we know that it was never destroyed in the past. The grandfather paradox here would say you can go back in time and try to kill your grandfather, but if he never died, he never died. There's nothing you can do to change that. Now the second kind of timeline is a mutable line, and that's the murky one. That's where things can be changed. Paradoxes can exist. This is where the grandfather paradox would happen, where you can go back in time and actually kill your grandfather. And there are a couple theories to explain why that could happen. One of them brings in alternate universes, where it says you travel back in time, you kill your grandfather, everything's still fine, but you're in an alternate universe and you can never get back to where you were before. This is why time travel is dangerous. But now that I've taught you, how to talk about time travel, and I've taught you about the dangers of potentially messing with things, I want to see some of these on the street. Thank you.
Never thought that would go to Hermione in her time turn.
Do I,
See it coming.
I have to get back to 1955.
We have to go back. Do I just click stop record?